Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Pusey House Chapel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kate Maver, and I'm the Master of St. Cross College. I've been here for 2 years now. I'm really delighted to welcome you here for our panel discussion. As we celebrate St. Cross at 60, we've got a chance to reflect on how far the college has come since its modest beginnings on St. Cross Road 60 years ago. And today's discussion is going to be hosted by our student committee president, Deborah, who's doing a DPhil in medical sciences. And I'd just like to thank Jade for all she's doing in support for our students. Also, a little bird has told me that it is her birthday today. So she's... So thank you, Jade, for giving up your birthday afternoon to be with us. We're especially fortunate to be joined by three distinguished panelists whose scholarship and long association with St. Cross give them a unique insight into its history and character. Professor John Barton, Emeritus Oriel and Lang Professor of the Interpretation of Holy Scripture, who joined St. Cross as a Fellow in 1974, and he played a key role in the move from St. Cross Road up to here in St. Giles. Professor Diarmaid MacCulloch, Emeritus Professor of the History of the Church, and one of the authors of the great tome, St. Cross at 50, who's been a Fellow here since 1995. And Professor Helena Hamerow, Professor of Early Medieval Archaeology and former Vice-Master, who's been a St. Cross Fellow since 1996. So each has played an important part in the life of the college and brings a deep understanding of how it has evolved and how its founding ideals continue to shape our community today. After the panel discussion, there'll be an opportunity for input from you, the audience. So I encourage you to join in and share your questions, and also we'd love to hear your reflections. If any of you can predate John, that would be great. Thank you all for being here to mark this special occasion. Before we start, can I remind you that we are actually going to record this panel discussion and upload it to the website after the event. And if anybody is in any way uncomfortable with that, if you could talk to one of our development team afterwards, we can sort that. So anyway, please now join me in welcoming our host, Deborah, to start the panel discussion. Thank you, Jade.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. And also thank you to Kate and also the development team for asking me to host. I think it's a pretty good use of a birthday, if you ask me. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you to the panel also for coming. I guess I'll get started with the questions. Starting off with the early days, looking at the 1960s through to the 70s. As Kate mentioned, St. Cross did have humble beginnings on St. Cross Road, with wooden huts and the old schoolhouse at its heart. What do you think those beginnings tell us about the kind of community the founders were trying to create at the time? Maybe we'll start with John.
Yes, well, the college was 9 years old, therefore, when I joined, and so many of the fellows were still founding fellows and did have a sort of vision of what the college should be. And partly it was negative in that St. Cross wanted to be not like most of the other colleges. And that was partly in that it didn't want to be so formal. It wanted to be, and was from the beginning, mixed in sex. And it wanted to have graduate students, not undergraduates. When I joined, I think there were 9 graduate students. There may have been more than that, but not very many more. And it was primarily, therefore, a sort of club for fellows rather than for students, and that grew over the years. But I think the idea was that fellows, university lecturers in subjects that undergraduate colleges didn't want, because they weren't perhaps teaching subjects that undergraduates studied. And the idea was that those people should have the advantage, which in Oxford you can't do without really, of being a member of a college. And so the college was constructed to provide them with a home, and then to expand to take on graduate students, as of course Lineker and Nuffield already did in those days. They were already graduate societies. But I think it was an attempt to form a college which would be unlike many of the existing ones in terms of being much more informal, much less hierarchical, and really providing a home for people for whom the traditional colleges hadn't done that.
Yeah, well, thank you, John.
Well, actually, I very much warm to this idea that John's already brought up, that the college was very different from the other colleges. And my reminiscence of this, my first contact with St. Cross, was actually about 10 years before I became a fellow in 1995. Well, I was a graduate student in Cambridge, so not 10 years, but more like 15, 20. And habitually, I went to the University Library Tea Room, a wonderful institution in Cambridge. I recommend it to all of you, many of you will know it. But the point was that the tea room always had, in a splendidly ecumenical gesture, the Oxford University Almanac framed within the tea room. You may know this, it is literally an almanac, but above it is a picture, a lithograph, an engraving or whatever, of a bit of the university, the colleges particularly, so you'd have a majestic view of All Souls, ... But one year, in the late 1970s, there was a rather startling picture in this almanac. It was very jolly, and it was the old schoolroom on our St. Cross Road site. And some of us will have that picture. I've got a copy in my living room. It's very attractive. I thought to myself, gosh, that's different. It's like nothing I've seen in Oxbridge College. I'd like to go there. And 15 years or so more, 20 years, I became a fellow here. And of course, what that embodied was precisely the difference of St. Cross. Not only that it was different, but it gloried in being different. They'd looked at all these po-faced engravings in the previous almanac over the years, and they thought, let's do something different. We'll have this extraordinarily lovely lithograph, not lithograph or whatever, print of the college in vivid colour. I recommend it to everybody as a symbol of what the college meant in its early days, and a precious gift to the future as to what the college must remain.
But by the time I arrived in 96, the hut was long gone. But I remember thinking, people keep talking about this hut. What is it? And I love the way people sort of made, the more senior fellows made a sort of virtue of the college's humble beginnings. And I mean, of course, the hut was a pretty grand hut from the photographs I've seen. But, that was sort of almost downplayed. And yes, we were poor, but we were happy sort of story. And that was very much part of the ethos, that it wasn't something to be concealed or sort of be embarrassed about. We were different, we had humble beginnings, and look where we're going now. And so that was the feel in 96, I think.
The hut was certainly a symbol of all that. Yeah. And the hut was remarkable because it was a hut. But when you were inside, it was very well decorated by Kits van Henigen, who had, of course, a very good eye for what would look good. And it was a sort of TARDIS, really, because when you got inside, you were in a college, even though it was a wooden hut. It had some tables which were higher up, which you could sit round, have your lunch, and some lower ones with coffee tables by them. And Fred Hodcroft, who started Fred's Lunch, used to say that the higher ones were for eating lunch and doing serious business, and the lower ones were for plotting. And that was very much the flavour.
Thank you. Maybe off the back of that, we could perhaps explore how the early emphasis on informality and friendliness helped shape that shared space in the early days.
It shaped it tremendously because, as John said, there were very few students to start with. And also they were very good students because the college had no money. Therefore, it took students who were being financed by someone else with a generous scholarship. And so it was inevitable and excellent that these students were treated as colleagues by the fellows. They were young colleagues who would go on to be fellows of colleges or academics generally. And that's a very happy accident, born of poverty. And so often in the early history of the college, something which could have been a disadvantage was turned to an advantage. And though we now have, 600 students, something of that order, instead of 9, we, I think, need to hang on very strongly, very fiercely to that thought that the students here are colleagues. And that's emphasised by the fact there is no senior common room. Some early fellows, I think, didn't like that, did they? They wanted the Oxbridge mystique of the common room into which one could pass the port senior tutor, that sort of thing. And often they left and found a college where they could luxuriate in such nonsense. But what was left were people who were prepared to see students as equals, which you can do as for postgrads. Not so easy with undergrads. After all, undergraduates are basically animals. Whereas postgraduates are well on the way to being rounded human beings. And so it's much more possible.
Yes. There was certainly some delight in puncturing the traditions of other colleges. And that we had an informal committee on the invention of college traditions. And this is where we have, some people here will have heard of White Boot, I'm sure, who was an official like Black Rod in the Houses of Parliament, who summoned governing body meetings by kicking the door with a white boot. And somewhere in the college there is a white boot that someone bought to commemorate. There were silly things of that kind, but it was a general feeling that one wanted the college not to take itself as seriously as other colleges were perceived, perhaps wrongly, to do. And that was part of the ethos.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Again, I arrived a bit later, but there was still this strong sense of informality. I mean, the college took research and study very seriously, but it didn't take itself very seriously. And so even entering as a new, relatively young fellow at the time, felt quite easy. It was quite easy to fit in. The college was, I think a little bit like a home for everybody. So it was very, relaxed space, I think, compared to other colleges one could perhaps name, but won't.
Well, thank you. Perhaps maybe we'll move on to the actual move to St Giles now. So the move to Pusey House site in the early 1980s was a defining moment in St Cross's history. What did the move represent to you, and how did it shape the college's identity?
Well, I mean, I think it was very important at the basic level of providing dignified buildings at the college. The hut was great, and I hope lives on as part of the spirit of St Cross, but the college couldn't have gone on existing forever in a wooden hut. And the fact that these buildings were, to some extent, looking for someone to inhabit them, and that the college was looking for somewhere it could inhabit, was a very happy coming together of interests. And I think it was a very significant move to come here, and of course to come to a wonderfully central site in Oxford. I mean, we spent a lot of time before we came here thinking, Wolfson are so lucky because they've got these amazing new buildings, and indeed they were, but they were some way from the centre, and St Cross has ended up, opposite St John's is as good as it gets, isn't it? Really? So I think...
And the lamb and flag.
Indeed, the lamb and flag. but it was, I think, so it was important on that basic level. But I think also it was a moment at which the college could have decided to become more like a traditional college in other ways, and it didn't do so. It didn't start to invent a senior common room and hierarchy, but tried to retain the atmosphere it had, even in these, after all, dignified and beautiful buildings. It didn't spoil the good things that the college already had, I think, which could have happened but didn't.
I think John's being a bit modest here because he is part of the story of the move, are you not?
Well, maybe. I think Michael Brooks, who was the university land agent and was a fellow of the college, and I were chatting over possible places the college could move to, and we'd heard that Pusey House might be interested in doing something with its buildings, and I think the idea developed from there. But which of us, as it were, had the idea, I can't now say, but it emerged.
Collaboration of minds.
It was collaborative, yeah.
And I think those who see the site now and don't go very far back don't realise just what an extraordinary asset this was. The front quad was there, and it was by an extremely distinguished Gothic architect, Temple Moore, and his son. And behind it was green space. Nothing but an orchard, trees, right back to the lane at the back of the college as it is now. That was unique in central Oxford, and we got it. And we were able to plan for the future with that site. I'm going back now, I wasn't there. But there was the possibility of using this site in any way the college wanted. And once more, the leisure to think about it properly because of the happy accident of our poverty. If we'd had a great donor, and heaven knows John could tell us about all the efforts to find a great donor, if we'd had a great donor, they'd have landed us with a building of the 80s, rather as Wolfson were landed with a building of the 60s. Instead of which, we've been able to build bit by bit and create, in the end, these two wonderful quads. That's one of those other happy accidents which seem to me to characterise this college.
Yeah, I mean, by the time I arrived as a student, of course, the college was already here. And the only thing I remember, because I had friends here, I wasn't myself a student here, but it already felt as if it had always been here. I would have been very surprised had I known how recently it had actually moved to St. Giles. So it had that sense of permanence. We've always been here. And of course, it was and is, in the centre of the collegiate university. And it just felt, that's where it belonged. So it's amazing how quickly that integration, that settling happened.
I had the interesting experience of having been quite involved with Pusey House as a religious institution before the college had anything to do with it. And I remember, for example, the bike sheds here, which were what's now the common room. That was a sort of open area with little cupboards and places to lock your bike up and so on. And the place was very run down and needed a lot of renovation and a lot of development. But it was, as Diarmaid said, largely open space in a sense. And therefore, we could do what we liked with it. And that was very important.
Maybe leading on from that, you mentioned earlier about puncturing traditions. Many students do arrive here without preconceived ideas of Oxford and traditions, and as you've mentioned, we're not the most stiff college, if that's for lack of a better word. Do you feel like that's helped, that freedom from preconceived ideas has helped students integrate into St. Cross and also allowed St. Cross to develop more of an open, independent spirit?
Yes, I mean, there's a sense in which if you didn't know what Oxford colleges were like, you didn't realise how distinctive St. Cross was. And it is, appreciating the college is partly predicated on having an idea of an Oxford college which this defeats, as it were. It's curious that it depends on negating something that people knew about. And if you come here as a student and had no idea what Oxford colleges are like anyway, this place, I think, would strike you as rather a normal environment. I hope it would. But you wouldn't have the advantage of being able to say, and it's distinctive by comparison with other colleges, because you wouldn't know about them. And it was, I remember, I was senior tutor for a short time, and I remember drawing up a sort of advert for the college, And when I'd finished, I realised it was full of negatives. Not because I was being negative about the college, but I was saying it's not like, and then you went through all the things other colleges did. But of course, unless someone knew that, what they were like, they wouldn't have got the message. And now I'm sure St Cross has to sell itself as what it is, but not constantly drawing comparisons with other colleges.
And I think that is helped by the fact that the student body is so international, that so many students won't have preconceptions. On the other hand, they will have some ideas of what they want from Oxford, formed by watching Inspector Morse or its successors. And that's important to realise, and we did realise it. I was also a senior tutor soon after I arrived, and we began noticing students wanted things that other students had, like a formal hall. There wasn't a regular formal hall in 1995. There were special dinners, but not that rhythm of weekly dinners. So we created it from scratch. And it was then, I think, on Thursday nights rather than at the present. And it was a bit hard work to start with because some students became extremely enthusiastic and some fellows also. But sometimes we were down to 12 people. But we felt it was really important to keep this going, and how it has flourished since. Because it means that students and fellows can invite people knowing that there will be a hall with a certain formality, and our masters over the years have been extremely good in lightly giving it that formality, laying down some ground rules as to how this evening dinner should be, and saying the grace in Latin with great aplomb. And visitors, I think, find this really impressive, or they take it for granted. So we're providing something which some students will expect, and in a sense deserve, because they've come to Oxford, they're buying into an Oxford ethos, which has that as part of its identity.
No, I think what Dermot says is very interesting. Having been here almost 30 years, you can really see how successive generations of students have sort of shaped the college, and their aspirations and interests have brought to the college, yes, new traditions and new ideas and so on. And because it's of no great age, because it's not kind of encased in a sort of medieval fabric, it has that flexibility, and it can quite easily adapt to change, I think, in a way that perhaps older colleges might find more difficult.
And just to squeeze in another question, because I do think this is quite important. As mentioned, St Cross was quite unusual in admitting women fellows and students from its foundation, when classically a lot of Oxford colleges were all male. How significant do you think that was to the development alongside the other non-traditional aspects?
It was important. I mean, thinking back now, colleges which had women fellows were rare. There were 5, I think, women's colleges which didn't have any male fellows, but the majority of colleges, of course, were male and single sex. And at St Cross, so far as I'm aware, it was never an issue at all. I mean, it was a college in the first instance for people who hadn't got fellowships in other colleges, and whether they were male or female was not relevant. And of course, the first master, Kit Van Heiningen, had a wife who was a founding fellow in her own right, Ruth, who died not so very long ago. I think, as I said, it was simply never an issue. I came here from a junior research fellowship at Merton, which was a fairly traditional college in those days. And fellows there asked me afterwards, you know, what's it like to be in a college with women fellows? And I thought, well, it didn't seem to be a very interesting question, because it seemed normal, what you would expect. But it wasn't in Oxford what you would expect, of course.
Any other comments?
I mean, even in 1983, when I arrived as a student, not at St Cross, another college, so by then, I think nearly all, if not all, of the former men's colleges had gone mixed. But very, very few had appointed even one governing body fellow who was a woman. You know, they might have had a temporary appointments, or lecturers and so on, but almost no fellows as late as 1983.
Yeah.
So although at St. Cross it might well have felt normal and ordinary, I mean, that certainly was not the case more widely for many years to come.
When I left St. Cross in 1991, I went to Oriel as a fellow, because my chair was assigned to Oriel. And that was the last men's college to admit women. And in fact, the first woman fellow of Oriel became a fellow on the same day as I became a fellow there. And the contrast between St. Cross and Oriel, well, people said, it must be wonderful for you now to be in a traditional college instead of in a mere society, as we were and still are. And I'm afraid they got rather a dusty answer when they said this, because I found the move like a move back in time. Now, I'm not talking about how Oriel is now. Oriel is a good college, and I was very happy there. But there was a sense of a time warp in going from St. Cross to Oriel in the early 90s. And I think people who went to many other traditional colleges from here had rather similar feelings.
Thank you. Okay, well, I guess let's move into the noughties, or 90s through to the noughties, looking at expansion, growth, and more independence. So from its early days as a small graduate society to a thriving college now, St. Cross has expanded in size and ambition. What do you think have been the main benefits and challenges of that growth?
Well, I mean, I think the expansion in size and ambition are two linked things. They are connected. So we couldn't have achieved our ambitions, or if you like, dreamed big, without expanding. Those two things really came together. So without a big endowment, how are you going to achieve those things? You need to grow. And so I think the two things have gone together. And although, of course, you know, it's been a long time since everybody knew everybody. We're just too big now. But nevertheless, I think the way in which St. Cross has maintained a sense of community is very striking. But it's added that kind of buzz that a bigger place provides. And also for people who've only arrived relatively recently, by which I mean, the last 20 years or so. You know, it's difficult to remember, but, you know, we were not what Andrew Gowdy called a 24-hour college when I arrived. There was no evening porter. The college shut at 5 or 6, whatever, unless there was a special dinner on, or you lived in college. That was it. There was nothing going on. There was nobody here. So that growth, I think, was essential and hugely beneficial.
And needs working on. I'm not sure we've caught up with the size of the college and the implications of that yet. And for every college, lockdown, COVID was a setback. But particularly here, when so many things had run on informal relationships and had not yet been given an institutional basis. So that's I think, on our present agenda, that the life of the college needs some tactful, careful underpinning by the management to make it work and to make those informal relationships flourish, because there is a structure. It was a very necessary process, but when I think that when I arrived in 1995, the total population of the college was still only 120, which meant we could all, if we wanted, fit in the dining hall. The dining hall had been designed for that sort of number. Now, of course, it's impossible. So we've got questions of size to work out now, which is a pleasing opportunity as well as a bit of a headache.
Yes, I think clearly the size must be a strain in some ways now on the resources, which are not endless. And I see that will be a problem. And of course, things that you were saying, Diarmaid, about what students expect, that we've gone from saying, well, you're getting something you don't get anywhere else, to saying we must ensure you get at least what you would get anywhere else.
Yeah.
And that's important, and you can't ignore that drive. So one can't obviously harp on about distinctiveness if you're defending providing less than other colleges provide for the same sort of fee.
So endowment matters, doesn't it? And a hard-headed thing to say about the expansion of the college is that it means the expansion of the alumni base, which was extraordinarily small in the 1990s. There had been very few students, and they weren't old enough yet to be rich for the most part. So this is a natural growth thing, which we can certainly build on, but that it needs building on the fact that we now have opportunities which were simply impossible in earlier days.
Thank you. I guess looking at independence, St Cross has long expressed a wish for greater independence within the university. What does independence mean for St Cross today?
When did it start, the independence thing?
Well, I suppose from the very beginning, if I talked to the conversations with founding fellows, a lot of them thought, well, one day we might be not just a kind of club for fellows no other college wants, which is almost how we started, but rather a proper college like all the other colleges, and with a charter with its own statutes and so on. So that was already there, I think, in the beginning, that St Cross wanted to be a full college. But, of course, when you look at the hard-headed realities of that, in terms of the kind of endowment you need, and the risks involved with being wholly independent of the university, centrally, it starts to look rather less appealing than it might initially seem. And so I don't know what the thinking at the moment on the college is on this. But I could imagine that the question whether one should make a priority of going independent would be a question. It's not a question, the answer to which is obvious.
No, and hasn't been through all my time. And we were already talking about independence quite a lot in governing body in the 1990s, weren't we? And we could see that there were good reasons for not going ahead. But there were lots of things which were irksome. For instance, and it sounds trivial, but it's still important, the coat of arms, which the college were wonderfully and ingeniously worked out by John, who I think is here. So hurrah for John. But to start with, it was used informally because the College of Arms did not think it appropriate for a society like ours to apply for matriculation of a coat of arms. And that we persuaded them, I think, about 2000, that it should be properly matriculated, which means a grant of arms by Garter King of Arms, which is important because it's our branding, it's our logo. As much as any commercial business agonizes about its logo, well, we had a ready-made one which is extraordinarily heraldically ingenious and makes us look very old because it's very simple. That was Tiffany's great skill, and we were able to treasure that, and now we've got it. We've got it forever and ever and ever by grant of the Garter King of Arms.
Yes, I think that the sense that it's not quite enough to be a society in the university. I mean, St Cross with Kellogg and now Reuben are the three societies who are not colleges and not permanent private halls, which is something else again. And there are plenty of people in the university who say, often in the pages of the Oxford magazine, these societies are not really colleges, they're pretend colleges. And that feeling is still around among some people in the university, just as it was in the early days. This is not really, it calls itself a college, but it isn't really one. Now, I think anyone who's been at St Cross knows that the life here is collegiate, as it is in all the real colleges. And I'm not sure that would be enhanced by the college becoming independent, particularly. But it's a good aim to have, I think. But I don't think that this attitude of rather looking down on the societies is very widespread any longer in the university. There are one or two prominent people who still espouse it. I mean, I can remember sitting on high table in one or two colleges and on announcing that I was a Fellow of St. Cross, being met with a sort of slightly sneering attitude.
Yeah.
But I don't think, this is a while ago, I don't think one would find that now, really. I can think of people who would be like that, but I can't think of anywhere where that would institutionally be the case.
Partly because the balance of the university has changed, hasn't it? It was very much an undergraduate-oriented university in the 1960s, 70s. It is not now. It is a postgraduate university with undergraduates, which means we're on the winning side here. And I would say, and I have said to my graduate students over the years, if you want a proper postgraduate experience, do not go to an undergraduate college, because you will always be playing second fiddle to those entitled young people under the age of 21. And so you go to a proper postgraduate college, and that's a much more convincing thing to say than it would have been 40, 50 years ago.
I think for all the reasons that Dermot and John have said, independence would be a good thing in and of itself. But of course, independence without a really proper endowment would be quite a hollow thing. So I think, we need to think of those two things together, and it's the endowment combined with independence that would enable St. Cross, which already punches hugely above its weight. I don't know to what extent people realize it's hugely above its weight in terms of research and the quality of the students and so on, to really just get to that next level. So I think we need independence based on a really significant endowment.
I think the point about graduate expansion is very important. I mean, if you go back to when I was a research student doing a DPhil in the late 60s, early 70s, graduate life in Oxford was very thin in those days. Some colleges didn't even have a middle common room, but you would just continue being a member of the junior common room. And very few of them made much provision for graduates. And a graduate college was something of a novelty. But of course, postgraduate degrees were not that common in those days. I was thinking back that of the people I had tutorials from as an undergraduate, none of them had a doctorate. It wasn't a normal expectation that someone who was teaching in Oxford would have a doctorate. Some of them did. Others regarded this as rather quaint, as an American thing to do that we don't do here. It was a quite different atmosphere, and the growth of realizing that graduates are central to university, to education and to research is something of a novelty in Oxford, I think, really, which we are on the crest of that particular wave.
I would agree. Thank you. So now to the 2010s, 2020s, present day, really, looking at consolidation and looking to the future beyond right now. As St. Cross looks to the future, what lessons from its past should it carry forward?
Gosh. The archaeologist is expected to talk about the deep past, the lessons from the past. I think the quality that we bring from the days of the hut, as it were, that sort of interest in community, in breaking with tradition, in not being bound too much by the past and by tradition, is in a way one of our strengths. So yes, there are lessons from the past, but one of them is don't be too held back by the past. And I think, the future is likely to be a very different place for all sorts of reasons. And I think St. Cross is exceptionally well placed, I think, to kind of weather any storms, and also, again, sort of change shape a little bit and emerge as something quite new as and when it has the opportunities to do that.
One of the things I started to see, I was here from 74 to 91, and when I came, everyone who was a fellow was very strongly committed to the college because it was a home for them they hadn't had. By the time I left in the early 1990s, there were a number of fellows, particularly, especially perhaps in subjects where they worked distant from the college, who felt that because they didn't have their own students in the college very much, as you would if you were an undergraduate tutor, didn't have much of a stake in the place, and were given a fellowship because everyone had to have a fellowship, but didn't value it very much. And the sense of fellows of the college who weren't very committed to the college was growing. You don't get that in undergraduate colleges because the tutors, the fellows are mostly tutors who have students in the college they have to look after. And that isn't true of the graduate colleges. And I think that's a weakness which the college, I'm sure, addresses, but has to be continually aware of. And certainly over my time, there was a shift on that. And I remember fellows one never saw in the college. And there was a feeling, which I think is true, that it was rather easier for humanities people who didn't have such dominating timetables in some ways than it was for many scientists to get here and take part in the corporate life of the college. When there were other things they had to do in their labs and in their departments. So I think that was a sort of, from the past, a challenge. How do you make a graduate college where the fellows don't teach the students? They may do, but accidentally so. How do you make that as strongly corporate a body as the traditional undergraduate colleges have always been? So that's one thing I would hope one would go on reflecting on, that emerges from the way the college started to develop.
Yes, that is a structural problem which does work against that early ethos of everyone being a colleague of everybody else, whether a fellow or a student. And we have to remember that what's happened, because there are now 600 students, is that the place is very much the show for the students. It's there for the students. They're the big story. And fellows have other lives, particularly, as you say, on the STEM side of things. So one question, problem to be tackled, or opportunity, is how to engage the fellowship to be part of this bargain of being colleagues to younger academics. That's, I think, one of the big items on the agenda for the future. And it goes a long way back. It goes to, John spotted it. I began to spot it as well in the late 1990s as an issue.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is an issue. And also I think departments, the university, make increasing demands on both students and on academic staff, but also offer them many opportunities as well. So the college is always competing, really, for people's time and attention. And that is something we're constantly, I think, upping our game in an attempt to bring people in, keep them engaged, and so on. But it is, as we get bigger, as you might say, it's a bigger challenge.
Thank you. Maybe wrapping up now with the panel questions, maybe very briefly, if you could all comment on the following. Regarding the future St. Cross members, how would you like them to describe the college to one another and their peers in another 60 years?
In another 60 years.
60 years.
Yeah.
A home in Oxford. My chief home in Oxford when I was here. They'll have departments, but the sense that this is a place to which they come to meet people who are not in their department, who are in different disciplines. That's a huge advantage of any college. That this was a place where they enjoyed being and coming and feeling it was a refuge from the world.
Yes, I think I'd go along with all of that. The sense that you get in all Oxford colleges, not just in the graduate ones, that you can talk to people in other disciplines very easily, rather than having to seek them out laboriously, is in a way one of the joys of the Oxford collegiate system. And it's very important that St. Cross, like other colleges, goes on propounding that and defending it, because there are plenty of people who say, why do you have this extra tier of complication that other universities on the whole don't have. And I think you can only justify it in terms of the sort of interdisciplinarity that it breeds, which we all know nowadays is crucially important for the development of almost any subject. And it's something that the system here enshrines in its structures. And we want to go on defending that. But I think having experienced that would be what I feel I've carried forward into the rest of my own academic life. That I actually could have important academic conversations with people who knew about things other than the things I knew about. And I think that's to be held on to.
I absolutely agree. I think it's one of the things that makes St. Cross distinctive now, and I hope will be distinctive in 60 years, which is that there is scarcely a discipline that isn't represented here at St. Cross. And as you say, you can come into lunch and sit next to somebody who works in an area completely unrelated to what you work in. If you're a humanities person, you sit next to somebody in the mathematical or life sciences, and you learn the most amazing things about their research. Sometimes collaborations might grow out of those things. I mean, that is not something you can get anywhere. And having had my first job at a university that was not like that, I never met anybody who was outside of my department. So I'm not sure that people always realize quite how lucky we are to have that range, that diversity, and you know, long may it continue.
I do agree. Thank you so much, Diarmaid, John, and Helena. Wrapping up with my questions, I'd like to open the floor to questions from the audience, which will be aided by Ben and Verinda with a microphone.
Hi, Anthony Geffen, a fellow by special selection, I think is the right term. Several years ago I made a film for the college about raising money, I suppose, and so as an outsider then I was looking in. And it strikes me that the college, you know, when I made the film, I think that I interviewed lots of people. There's some big benefits here. One, you don't have a massive history, so you can still go on inventing yourself, I think. Number two, being a graduate college and cherishing that, because that's something people like to back and encourage, exactly, as Donna said. And so those two things I think are, you know, really important. The third thing was there's no high table here. And that's very significant because it feels like we're all together in this. And I think that's very important. So those are the three things that came out of the film. And then another thing struck me. I was invited to the 150th anniversary of Hartford a few weeks ago. And there are massive similarities between Hartford, you know, because Hartford was an amalgamation of lots of halls, but the early Hartford College, Hall, and where we are here. And I see an evolutionary path here, where we're 60 years into the path of what Hartford is now into 150 years. But there are some real similarities between the two. The difference is, of course, this is a graduate college. But I think the really exciting thing you have here is that you have this massive opportunity to invent and continue inventing a college that everybody wants to be part of. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Yes, just to add, it's questions and any memories or reminiscence from your time here. Yes, go ahead.
Just to say, would you like another copy of the almanac? My father was the founding master here, and he asked my husband, Birkin, to do the artwork. And we promised this to Carol some time ago, and it never actually came, but he could bring it tonight, a nice fresh copy of that lovely artwork, which I think it was done with sort of felt tip, actually, nothing background. Anyway, I'm really just boasting. But I'll get it, he's picking me up tonight, so I'll get him to bring it. And you are right, it is completely different from the old sort of almanac. And I just loved you saying that.
Well, thank you for reminding me, because seriously, it was a very important experience for me. No idea that I would even come to Oxford, let alone St. Cross, but I just kept that thought from that picture in my mind over 20 years.
Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? Oh, yes, okay.
Thank you. I'd just like to celebrate two particular aspects of the St. Cross experience that have meant a lot to me. First was that both the Hebrew and Islamic study centres had their original college base in the college. And that says, I think, something for the general breadth of view and vision here. The second is others have mentioned the internationalism and the diversity of discipline present here, and also the enormously valuable lunch experience. And just one personal experience, I've been working with a small group of delightful people in the eastern jungle of Ecuador, the Wadani, and I came back to Oxford on one of my very rare visits and found myself sitting next to a nice lady at lunch, and she asked me what I was doing. It turned out she was the world authority on the anthropology of the Wadani. So that's what you can expect. That's the resource, the richness of resource that this college offers as a result of so many of the things that I've mentioned, the democratic atmosphere that encourages free discussion of all levels over lunch, and the international richness of the college and its diversity of interest. So I'm extremely grateful to St. Cross for providing these particular things, and many others.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks very much indeed. Just a reflection back as one of the early students. I was one of 6, I think, at the time, at the end of the 70s. And I'm very grateful to the college for the support that it provided me at that time, because I was, contrary to the suggestion which has been made, I was extremely impoverished and was actually paying my own way through. So the college hardship fund, which I don't think had existed before me, suddenly materialised, and I was very grateful for that. But I was also very grateful to the Helliwells, who looked after us in the wooden hut, because they knew what my circumstances were, and they quietly pointed out to me how to get access to the fridge out of hours so that I could feed myself. And I'm not sure that's recorded officially anywhere, but I'm, again, very grateful to them.
Thank you. Thanks, Mantis.
Thank you. I'm Mary Bryant. I would just like to ask, I'm recognising and absolutely endorsing all you say about where the college is and the values it has and the challenges it faces, particularly with its expansion and the different balance of fellows to students and how we continue to make community. I think what I'm asking is someone who's a friend to the college, not a member, but just a friend of research. What would you suggest that those of us who are not on the governing body can do to contribute to developing the future? I completely understand about money, not my thing, happy to try, but what can we contribute to help to build this community as we move forward if we're not part of the governing body and the fellowship?
That's a good question.
From the early days, there were two sorts of people who are perhaps not traditional in many colleges, again. There were members of the Common Room who weren't on the governing body, but were in most respects treated as if they were, really. I mean, I didn't know who was a governing body fellow and who wasn't when I joined, because they contributed in whatever way they could to the life, just as the fellows did. The other thing is, of course, there were a number of fellows who were not academics. People in posts in the university that carried entitlement to a professorial status, but who worked in finance or in land management or in various other things. And that made St. Cross, even in its early days, rather different from many colleges that didn't have so many folk in non-academic roles. And again, there was not a feeling that somehow only the academics were the real heart of the college. I mentioned the land agent, who I think probably actually really did have the original idea that we should move to this site. And his membership of the college was very important, and he was a fellow, but he wasn't an academic. And I think the diversity of the kinds of people in the college is itself an enrichment, which St Cross practiced rather earlier than many other colleges.
Wonderful. Oh, and another one behind you.
Actually, speaking as a thoroughly non-academic ex-bursar, I'm very happy to endorse all of those comments. But I wanted to just... Is this working or not? Okay, good. I wanted to bring a little story which I think ties together many of the things we've talked about. I was actually boring some of your wonderful students here with this story, so I felt like I needed to repeat it for all of you. When I was new in the job, Mark Jones, who was then the master, normally presided at the formal dinners, the special dinners. On one occasion, he decided he wasn't going to do that, and he asked me to preside. And of course, that meant I would need to read the Latin Grace, which has been mentioned, which was very scary. I did do Latin O-level. I considered this wasn't sufficient. I was very worried that there would, of course, at that dinner, almost certainly be brilliant academics and brilliant students who would have forgotten more about the classical languages than I would ever know. So this was a worry to me. And one day, shortly before this event, I came to lunch, and I sat down opposite one of our retired old emeritus fellows. And my great sadness is I can't remember who it was, and I suspect people in the room may well remember, and they should come and tell me afterwards. But I got talking to this chap about my worries, and he said, well, it turns out he was a retired professor of classical studies, and indeed was exactly the right person to be having lunch with, which, as we've heard, so often happens in St Cross. And I was worried about my pronunciation, and so he gave me possibly the most Oxford answer I've ever had to a question. And what he said was, well now, dear boy, shall we consider the geographical extent of the Roman Empire? Shall we consider the likely variations in pronunciation that would have occurred around that significant part of what was then the whole of the known world? Shall we also consider the length of time that Latin was spoken in the Roman Empire? Should we, for example, compare modern English to Chaucer's English? Could we look at the differences there? So in conclusion, dear boy, my advice to you is, you say the grace however you want. And you will have a very rigorous academic argument that at some point in time, at some point in geography, that's exactly how it was said. My only sadness is, I was saying to students, my only sadness is, at every single dinner thereafter where I presided, I was desperate for someone to come up to me at the end of a dinner and say, Buster, I'm not sure you got that quite right. Tragically, it never happened.
Thank you. Oh, Brenda. There's another one here.
I was just thinking about that point about community and also how it's made up of incredible individuals, and also connecting to the tome, the St Cross at 50, thinking of Georg Deutsch. He was my college mentor back in 2008 to 9 when I came to the college to do a master's in African Studies. And that dinner, I think there's a dinner quite early on when you meet with your mentor, and that was a particularly significant time when everything's very bewildering when one starts, and that embrace of that dinner and the college environment was especially memorable. And I think I'd come to do this particular course I had a baby of 6 weeks, and there was a lot happening at the time, and just those early days of the college life, and it was really extraordinary. So, and I've stayed on to become a member of the Common Room, and try to be very active in the college. So thank you very much, St. Cross.
Thank you. I think there was a question over here.
I'm Graham Harding. I'm a member, the last speaker of the MCR. And I'd be fascinated to know, so this is not a story or a statement, but really be fascinated to know how distinguished panel see possibilities for the MCR, because it seems to me it may be an underexploited resource by the college.
Yes, absolutely right, and it rather relates to your neighbour's question. This is a resource which the college could rely more on and make sure, encourage that people come in. One might think of a structural way of encouraging that, so that particularly students might meet people who have been associated with the college in different ways over the years. I think it's something we really, really ought to keep in mind.
Thank you. Oh, we've got a question at the front.
It is such a privilege to be here. Thank you. My name's Tonya. I have been a member of Common Room since 1988. Before that, I was doing research and teaching in various ways, and I was invited by the then master to become a member of Common Room, and it changed my life completely. What I really want to bring to your attention now is, of course, everybody can contribute to the college. You don't have to be the top professor. I consider myself ordinary, but my late husband and I, he passed about 8 years ago. We started a scholarship for an African student from South Africa, from Southern Africa, that was taken up last year. And we're now at the process, together with Milos, of trying to bump up that scholarship so it can be offered again. So if anybody doesn't know what to do, they can contribute to the it's called the St. Cross College Tembisa Hope Scholarship. And Tembisa is a Southern African word, Zulu word, meaning hold out hope. And this college is just so full of offering people hope. So if you don't know what else to do, you can help top up the scholarship to give somebody else a chance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just butt in there, Tonya, and say, I remember well enough you doing all that in the late 80s, and that was indeed an enormous contribution to the college and its ethos.
Thank you, Tonya. The scholarships are really helpful to students. I will keep going with questions unless someone stops me. So, okay. Well, I think we're at time now, but thank you so much for coming, for participating. It's been really interesting. And thank you to our panel also.
So I'd like to second the thanks, and particularly to you, Jade, for being the panel chair, but also to the audience for coming forward with so many wonderful reflections and observations. So next, as you leave the chapel, you will be given a leaflet, which is a bit like a treasure hunt. which will take you all around the college, seeing different things. We've got an exhibition in the West Wing, which for those of you who are new to the college since 20 years ago, is the new building. And we have there an exhibition of the last 6 decades of St. Cross. But the treasure hunt is all over the college. You can roam at will. But the good news is there is still tea and coffee in the common rooms. So if you need a quick refresher before you set off, I hope you'll join us back here at 5:30 for a wonderful evensong. But thank you all very much for coming to this session. And thank you again to our wonderful panelists.